Allow me to add a few remarks which might shed a different light on the topic global and local solidarity, and it might be another different light. I will begin with stating my main proposition. The term solidarity isn't of much help in the current discussion. What we are politically dealing with are mostly issues related to justice and fairness. Establishing the distinction is not merely a semantical exercise on my part, quite the contrary. I believe it had wide-reaching consequences on the academic and political discourse. Allow me to elaborate more on this and what it means for the current political situation. The public perception of the current economic and financial crisis is ambivalent. Maureen has said already a lot about this. The premise according to which events on the market are systemic is now largely assumed, and rare are those who challenge that assumptions. Many believe that the markets, with their own logic and dynamics, are to blame for the recent crisis. The computer-based, depersonalized transactions on the financial market have come to symbolize an economic driving force that the individual cannot escape. On the other hand, and at the same time, the systemic premise is being questioned in the current crisis, and the blame is being put on individuals instead. Of course, the claim according to which it's the speculators, the managers, and the businessmen with their greed who are responsible for the world's financial and economic volatility and the ensuing political woes is far easier to sell, especially for the media, than the abstract representation of systemic demands to which the businessman on the market or the trader on the floor is subordinated to. From this perspective, the wrongdoings of some individuals have caused or helped cause the crisis. Morality, virtue, solidarity are being called upon to form the foundation of economic and political activity. With this ambivalent background in mind, I believe it is worthwhile to once again examine in detail the issue of the joint responsibility of individuals, or in other words, solidarity, involved in economic relations. First, the market indeed does have its own logic, and this logic can easily be defined. It is all about making profits. This is an obvious statement, especially here in Chicago. A businessman who doesn't make a profit hasn't reached his goal. Thus, a market, in line with the German sociologist Niklas Luhmann, from the viewpoint of a systems theory, must be understood as a closed, functional entity following the principle of profitability. What is relevant here is that if I follow the principle, I will remain part of the market, but if I reject this logic, or if I underperform according to this logic, I will sooner or later be excluded from the system. A business that doesn't make any profits on the market will eventually go bankrupt. Being here in Chicago, let me quote Milton Friedman, who, in his famous phrase, stated the fact with no detour. The social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. Or in other words, the business of business is business. And indeed, no one can dispute the fact that market society, which is focused on profits, has brought about prosperity in a way that never before been experienced in the history of mankind. The proof is Professor Murphy's graph have never been shown. The market economy and the principle of profitability is a winning concept. And there's also no ethical objection to society relying on such a mechanism. Pope John Paul II, in his social encyclical Centesimus Annus, presents the principle of profitability as a guideline to good business management. Quotation, "The Church acknowledges the legitimate role of profit as an indication that a business is functioning well. When a firm makes a profit, this means that productive factors have been properly employed and corresponding human needs have been duly satisfied." This does not mean, if you allow me this remark, that businesses should solely focus on generating profits, as stated by Milton Friedman almost 50 years ago. I would argue instead that the conditions under which businesses operate today have fundamentally changed since then. Developments such as increasing inability of state to impose taxes, globalization without sufficient political order, the interaction with other cultures and values, as well as the significance of employment as a means of integrating individuals in society, just to name the most important factors, all of these points to the fact that it's critical for businesses to take on more responsibility, by all means in their own interest, in order to be able to fulfill their primary role under these new circumstances, namely to supply people with quality, reasonably priced and innovative goods and services. A detailed discussion of this issue will have to be reserved for another time. But let me come back to the fundamental logic of the market and the necessity of making profits. This logic still holds in the time of economic and financial crisis. In my opinion, it's absurd to hold a bank or those it employs responsible for the financial crisis just because they sold high-risk products with the aim of generating profits, or they strove to achieve a high return on equity. Indeed, businessmen, managers and employees are themselves constrained by the system, and generally the only choice they have is to either follow the market logic and pursue the system's target of generating profits, or in extreme cases to simply be completely excluded from the system. Nevertheless, accepting and recognizing that the market has its own systemic logic does not in no way mean that all societal problems can be solved through this logic. So I differ here from Professor Murphy. More often than not, the market doesn't solve problems but creates them. And that is due precisely to its systemic nature. The only interests that can be realized on the markets are those that are compatible with the principle of profit making. In our modern society, the income generating on the market is an indispensable prerequisite to leading a meaningful life. Without it, it's all but impossible to ensure participation in society. However, the many different interests of individuals will only find their way on the market if they obey the market's logic. Interests such as health or education must be satisfied beyond the market. That is, resources need to be captured from the market in order to satisfy these goals. Regardless of the one precise opinion on this matter, in our modern market-based society, the following conclusion can hardly be refuted. If, as a consequence of the market's functional logic, those who are excluded from the market form the blind spot of the market itself, and if at the same time we demand that in our modern enlightened society it be not the market but individual participation in society and the possibility to lead a meaningful life that be the regulative principle of our society, then it's necessary to set up a political framework to regulate the market and competition, and for the state to socially support those who are excluded from the market. In this sense, the shaping of the general economic framework is subjected to the logic of the political system and is a result of a democratic decision-making processes. So, and let me add here, this is in line with the ideas Cardinal Marx talked about yesterday. This is the idea of the ordoliberal program. It's about giving the economy a political framework to establish a functioning and at the same time a humane order of society. By the way, this is not unsimilar to the constitutional political economy research program established by James Buchanan here in the US, who recently stated that his ideas and the ideas of the ordoliberal are very close to each other. However, now that we have dealt with the political structures and institutions, we can now move on to addressing the issue of individuals' responsibility and the significance of solidarity in economic affairs. However unfortunate, there is a constant call, especially in times of crisis, on market actors to do business in an ethical and social fashion. In other words, a call for solidarity. Given the market systemic process, such I exposed it previously, and the demands that this process imposes on the actions of market actors, I believe that the principle of ethical prudence should be applied when addressing the solidarity issue. Social problem areas and injustices arising on the market and in a globalized society can hardly be tackled in a systemic and lasting way by simply hoping that individual actors will become more virtuous and ethical and exhibit more solidarity. Not only would any individual be out of his depths trying to act in such a way, but all his actions would be doomed from the start in the face of the market system if he were to be required again and again to counter the logic of the market through his be good attitude. The ancient principle, ultra posse nemo obligator, no one is obligated beyond what he is able to do, applies here as well. The principle of ethical prudence is thus translated as, do not expect a member of society to durably take position against his own economic interest for the good of society, be it locally or globally. That doesn't mean, and I insist on this point, that we should not be good people. And it certainly doesn't mean that society can effort not to educate its members and do without responsible citizens. The principle of ethical prudence simply reminds us of the fact that we, as a society, shouldn't start from the wrong side when addressing the issue of a just society. There's a hierarchy of accountability when it comes to ethical responsibility. Establishing a political framework allowing for the creation of fair conditions, even in a globalized market economy, is and remains society's primary mission and the fundamental undertaking of any political system found on individual consent. The demand for justice that is consequently issued towards the state and international organization is found in the democratic identity of modern societies and is a responsibility that must constantly be embraced anew. This is particularly true in the current situation. Pope Benedict writes in Caritas in Veritate, "The current crisis obliges us to positive experiences and to reject negative ones. The crisis thus becomes an opportunity for discernment in which to shape a new vision for the future." Acting with civil society and solidarity in mind can be viewed as a byproduct of virtue ethics and may, here and there, take on social meaning and occasionally influence political processes. However, such virtue ethics, or solidarity as you prefer, can only be viewed as complementing a political legitimate moral economy based on structural justice, primarily grounded in social ethics. To sum up, what markets and societies require first and foremost are just and fair rules, not fragile solidarity. Thank you.